New York City never sleeps, but some of its most fascinating places have been sleeping for decades. You walk past them, drive by them, or maybe you've zoomed in on Google Maps only to find a blurred, outdated satellite image that tells you absolutely nothing. Some of these places aren't hidden because they're dangerous. Some are hidden because the people in charge would really rather you not think too hard about what's still sitting there. These are 17 abandoned places in New York. Google Maps doesn't want you to see place 17. Old City Hall Subway Station, Manhattan. When the New York City subway opened on October the 27th, 1904, there was one station meant to make people say, wow. The original City Hall station beneath City Hall Park in Lower Manhattan was the crown jewel of the entire system. Guastavino tiled vaulted ceilings, brass chandeliers, colored glass, 3 skylights, and a design so elegant it looked more like a cathedral than a place to catch a train. On opening day, 150,000 people passed through it. By the end of the first week, 1 million riders had used it. On December 31st, 1945, it quietly closed forever. The reason was practical. As subway cars got longer, the station's tight curved platform couldn't accommodate them safely. Commuters had long preferred the nearby Brooklyn Bridge station with its express service. In its final year of operation, only around 600 passengers a day used City Hall. Keeping it open made no sense. Today, the station exists completely intact underground. If you ride the downtown 6 train to its last stop and stay on board as it loops back uptown, you'll catch a brief flash of those arched ceilings through the window. Maybe 4 seconds before the train carries you away. That's all most people ever get. Members of the New York City Transit Museum can book a 90-minute tour, but tickets sell out almost instantly. For everyone else, it stays just out of reach, sealed beneath the streets, looking exactly as it did the day it closed. Place 16, North Brother Island, the Bronx. You won't find North Brother Island on any tourist map. You can't book a ferry there. And if you show up in a kayak unannounced, the Parks Department will have something to say about it. The island sits in the East River between the South Bronx and Rikers Island. 22 acres of dense vegetation, crumbling hospital wards, and enforced silence. The city purchased it in 1885 to build Riverside Hospital, a quarantine facility for patients with contagious diseases, including typhoid fever, tuberculosis, and smallpox. It was the kind of place you were sent when the city decided you were too dangerous to live among other people. Its most famous involuntary resident was Mary Mallon, better known as Typhoid Mary, an Irish-born cook. Mallon was an asymptomatic carrier of typhoid fever. She could spread the disease without ever getting sick herself. Health authorities connected multiple typhoid outbreaks to households where she had cooked. In 1907, she was forcibly quarantined on the island. She was eventually released in 1910 on the condition she never work as a cook again, promptly took a cooking job under a false name, triggered another outbreak at a Manhattan maternity hospital that killed 2 people, and was returned in 1915. She lived there until her death in November 1938. The island also witnessed one of New York City's deadliest disasters. On June 15, 1904, a steamship called the General Slocum caught fire in the East River near the island's shore. Of the 1,358 mostly German-American passengers on board, 1,021 died. It remained the city's deadliest single event until September 11, 2001. Riverside Hospital closed in 1963. Most of the original 25 buildings still stand in states of extreme decay. Trees growing through shattered windows, poison ivy covering nearly everything. Access is restricted to researchers and scientists with formal permits. It is one of the most haunting places in the 5 boroughs, and most New Yorkers have never seen it in person. Place 15, Renwick Smallpox Hospital, Roosevelt Island. Roosevelt Island is one of those places New York visitors discover by accident. A thin sliver of land in the East River connected to Manhattan by a tram that somehow still works after all these years. Most people go for the FDR4 Freedoms Park, or simply because the tram ride is worth it. Fewer people walk to the southern tip of the island, where a Gothic stone ruin stands in partial collapse behind a chain-link fence. This is the Renwick Smallpox Hospital, built in 1856 to quarantine and treat patients infected with one of the most feared diseases of the 19th century. It was designed by James Renwick Jr., the same architect responsible for St. Patrick's Cathedral on Fifth Avenue. The design reflects that pedigree: Gothic arches, ornate stonework, the kind of architectural ambition that seems out of place in a building meant to house the sick and dying. The hospital operated until 1875 and treated thousands of smallpox patients during its years of service. After closure, the building sat unused for decades. By the mid-20th century, even its secondary uses had ended. It has been deteriorating ever since. Today, you can see it clearly from the pedestrian path that runs along the island's edge. Close enough to read the architectural details, not close enough to walk inside. At night, lighting installed around the ruins illuminates the stone facade against the Manhattan skyline. The structure is a designated New York City landmark, though the designation hasn't stopped the decay from continuing year by year. Place 14, Ellis Island South Side Hospital Complex, Upper New York Bay. Every year, millions of people visit Ellis Island. They walk through the Great Hall, read the names on the registration walls, and take the obligatory photo with the Statue of Liberty over their shoulder. Almost none of them pay attention to what's sitting directly to their left as they step off the ferry. The south side of Ellis Island holds 22 additional buildings, a hospital complex that processed immigrants with suspected contagious diseases or signs of mental illness. At its operational peak, it represented one of the largest public health undertakings in American history, setting the standard for U.S. medical care at the time. When immigration restriction laws effectively shut down Ellis Island as a port of entry in 1954, the entire complex was simply locked and left. For nearly 60 years, it sat there while the main building received a major restoration and became a museum. The hospital buildings stand today in various states of ruin: peeling walls, collapsed ceilings, dust-covered examination rooms. The morgue still contains its cold metal tables. Sunlight filters through broken windows onto floors that haven't been properly used in 7 decades. Limited hard hat tours operated by the nonprofit Save Ellis Island provide occasional access, but they are infrequent and require advanced planning. For anyone who has ever stood on that ferry and glanced left toward those other buildings on the far end of the island, wondering what they were, those buildings were where the people who didn't pass inspection ended up. Place 13, New York State Pavilion, Flushing Meadows Corona Park, Queens. In 1964, New York hosted a World's Fair that drew an estimated 51 million visitors over 2 years. Governor Nelson Rockefeller commissioned Philip Johnson to design the New York State Pavilion, with explicit instructions to make it the largest and tallest structure at the entire fair. The Tent of Tomorrow was an enormous open-air elliptical structure measuring 350 by 250 feet, with the world's largest cable suspension roof at the time, and a floor made of 567 terrazzo panels, forming a giant Texaco highway map of New York State. 3 concrete observation towers rose beside it, the tallest reaching 226 feet. During the fair, visitors rode a capsule elevator called the Sky Streak to the top for panoramic views over Queens. The fair closed in 1965. The Tent of Tomorrow briefly became a concert venue and then a roller rink before shutting down in 1974. The suspension roof was declared structurally unstable in 1976 and removed, leaving the terrazzo map exposed to decades of open-air weathering. The complex sat deteriorating in Flushing Meadows Corona Park, visible from the Long Island Expressway, but largely ignored. You may recognize the towers from the 1997 film Men in Black, where they appeared as a backdrop to alien activity. That felt appropriate. The pavilion was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 2009. A $24 million stabilization project began around 2019. As of 2024, the Tent of Tomorrow remains inaccessible to the public, and the observation towers have not reopened. All of this for a structure that a mayoral committee recommended demolishing immediately after the 1965 fair closed. Sometimes bureaucratic indecision accidentally preserves history. Sometimes it just lets history rot a little slower. Place 12, Kings Park Psychiatric Center, Kings Park, Long Island. Drive east on the Long Island Expressway long enough and you'll pass through a town called Kings Park. If you pull off and drive toward the waterfront, you'll find something that takes a moment to register. a 13-story concrete building rising above the trees, its windows mostly shattered, no one inside. That's Building 93, the centerpiece of the former Kings Park Psychiatric Center, one of the strangest things visible from a public road anywhere in New York State. Kings Park opened in 1885 as the Kings County Asylum. It was designed as a farm colony where patients would tend crops and raise livestock. That philosophy didn't last. By the mid-20th century, the approach had shifted to something considerably darker: lobotomies, electroshock therapy, and experimental treatments. The patient population peaked in 1954 at 9,303 people, more than the entire population of the neighboring town of Smithtown at the time. The center occupied 800 acres with over 150 buildings, its own railroad spur, power plants, and working farm. As psychiatric medications made large-scale institutionalization less necessary, the population declined. Kings Park formally closed in 1996. The grounds are now part of Nissequogue River State Park, which means you can jog past the ruins of an abandoned psychiatric hospital on a Tuesday afternoon, while a man with a stroller passes in the opposite direction, and nobody finds that especially strange. The remaining buildings are loaded with asbestos, which is why demolition has been slow. Patient records, X-ray machines, and personal belongings were left behind when the doors closed. Entering the buildings is illegal. Park police patrol the property, and enforcement tightens noticeably around Halloween each year. Place 11. Fort Tilden, Rockaway Peninsula, Queens. Fort Tilden exists in a kind of limbo that's hard to categorize. It is part of the Gateway National Recreation Area, a public park you can walk through and explore freely. What you cannot do is ignore the massive concrete military bunkers that have been slowly sinking into the sand dunes since the Army deactivated the base in 1974. The fort was established in 1917 as a coastal defense installation and served through both World Wars. Battery Harris East and Battery Harris West were built to house 16-inch guns, among the largest artillery pieces in the American military inventory of that era. By the Cold War era, the installation had shifted to Nike missile defense systems. When the Army pulled out in 1974, it left behind the concrete batteries, deteriorating structures, and a landscape that has since been reclaimed by sand, wild vegetation, and graffiti artists who have turned the old gun emplacements into some of the most ambitious outdoor murals in the city. Climb to the top of Battery Harris East, and you get simultaneous views of Jamaica Bay, the Atlantic Ocean, and the Manhattan skyline. It is a genuinely spectacular panorama, and the fact that it comes from standing on top of an abandoned Cold War artillery fortification is most of the point. Superstorm Sandy caused significant damage to the site in 2012, and parts remain under environmental remediation. Place 10. Seaview Hospital, Staten Island. In the early 20th century, tuberculosis was killing people across New York City at a pace that made civic leaders desperate for solutions. In 1913, the city opened Seaview Hospital on Staten Island, at the time, the largest tuberculosis sanatorium in the country. The facility sat on 177 acres of open land, designed around fresh air, sunlight, and the belief that environment itself was a form of medicine. Seaview was also the site of a landmark medical breakthrough. In 1952, it was among the first hospitals in the world to conduct large-scale clinical trials of isoniazid, the antibiotic that proved effective against tuberculosis. The results changed the global course of the disease's treatment. That happened on Staten Island, in a building most people on the island today couldn't locate on a map. As tuberculosis became manageable, the historic pavilions, Georgian Revival brick structures with arched colonnades, were gradually abandoned. The site is listed on the National Register of Historic Places and is a New York City landmark district. The pavilions stand in varying stages of collapse. The city has made preservation announcements periodically. Whether substantive action follows remains the open question it has been for decades. Place 9. Bartow Station, Pelham Bay Park, the Bronx. In the 1890s, the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad ran a line through the Bronx that included a stop at Bartow, near what is now Pelham Bay Park. It was a modest neighborhood station, built to serve the communities growing along the route. The line was discontinued in 1937, and the station was left behind. Unlike most places on this list, Bartow Station isn't dramatic. It doesn't have a 13-story building or vaulted ceilings. It's more like an absence, a place where something once stood that the landscape has almost entirely absorbed. The remains of the old platform are buried under decades of overgrowth inside Pelham Bay Park, the largest park in New York City. Getting there requires taking the 6 train to its last stop, a bus connection, and then a half-mile walk along a horse trail into the park. It is not a destination in any conventional sense. It's the kind of thing you find when you're specifically looking for it, or when you wander off a marked trail and start noticing that the ground has a flatness the surrounding terrain doesn't explain. For railroad history enthusiasts, it's worth the effort. For most people, it's a reminder that New York City's transportation past is buried in the landscape in ways that nobody thinks to look for. Place 8. The Staten Island Boat Graveyard, Rossville. On the western shore of Staten Island, at a place called Rossville, there is a stretch of tidal marsh where ships go to die. Dozens of wooden hulks, tugboats, ferries, barges, schooners, lie partially submerged in the water, some of them dating back to the early 20th century. Masts lean at impossible angles. Rusted metal hardware protrudes from rotting timber. The site smells exactly the way you'd expect. This is the Arthur Kill Ship Graveyard, more commonly called the Staten Island Boat Graveyard, and it has existed in various forms since at least the 1930s. For much of the 20th century, the site was used by companies that stored and dismantled vessels here. Some boats were salvaged, others were simply beached and forgotten. Gradually, the marsh did what marshes do and began pulling everything into itself. The graveyard is visible from the road and from the water, and it looks different depending on the tide. At low water, the full scale of the hulls becomes visible in a way that's genuinely startling. The size of some of these vessels, half sunk and listing in the mud, is hard to grasp until you're standing there looking at it. Photographers, urban explorers, and people who simply want to watch something enormous decay without anyone interfering have been visiting for years. Ownership of the surrounding parcels has shifted over time, and shoreline access has been inconsistent. What doesn't change is the graveyard itself, growing slowly more submerged with each passing season. Place 7. Camp Hero, Montauk, Long Island. Camp Hero occupies a specific place in the New York imagination that goes considerably beyond its actual documented history, though the documented history is strange enough on its own merits. Built on the eastern tip of Long Island at Montauk Point, the base began as a coastal artillery installation during World War II and was later upgraded to serve as an Air Force radar station during the Cold War. A massive AN-35 radar tower, one of the largest of its type, still stands on the property and is visible from a long distance away. The base was decommissioned in 1981 and transferred to New York State. It is now Camp Hero State Park, which is freely and legally open to the public. What you'll find when you visit: bunkers, concrete gun batteries, a network of underground passages, the radar tower still standing, deteriorating military buildings scattered through the landscape, and approximately 4 decades of accumulated conspiracy theories about secret government experiments, time travel programs, and mind control operations allegedly conducted after the base officially closed. These theories are not supported by evidence, but have proven remarkably resilient, partly because the base genuinely does look like the sort of place where something classified might have happened. It's a beautiful park if you can get past the feeling that the place is watching you back. A visitor. 2019. The underground bunkers are partially accessible via state park trails. Some structures remain off limits. The radar tower stays standing largely because removing it would apparently cost more than leaving it where it is. Place 6. The Rockaway Trolley Terminal, Far Rockaway, Queens. Before Robert Moses spent the mid-20th century tearing out streetcar lines and rerouting New York's infrastructure around the automobile, Queens had an extensive network of trolley lines connecting neighborhoods that are today only reachable by car or long bus rides. One remnant of that network still exists in Far Rockaway, the remains of a trolley terminal building that once served as a hub for lines running across the Rockaway Peninsula. The building dates to the early 20th century and was abandoned after the trolley system was shut down in the 1950s. It is not architecturally dramatic. It does not look, at first glance, like something with a significant history, but it represents something that most New Yorkers don't know existed: a public transit infrastructure that was deliberately dismantled in favor of cars and buses, and which the city has spent decades quietly wishing it had held onto. Finding it requires real effort. It sits in a part of Queens that most visitors never reach, partially obscured by vegetation, with nothing around it signaling that it was ever worth noticing. For anyone interested in what New York's transportation history actually looked like before someone decided to erase most of it, it is worth the trip. Place 5. Letchworth Village, Thiels, Rockland County. Letchworth Village is located in Thiels, in Rockland County, technically outside New York City, but firmly within the greater New York area, and impossible to leave off any serious list of the region's abandoned places. It opened in 1911 as a state institution for people described at the time as feeble-minded and epileptic, a facility built on the idea that a pastoral, self-sufficient environment could treat and contain people deemed unfit for normal society. At its peak, more than 4,000 people lived there, including individuals with intellectual disabilities, mental illness, epilepsy, and in many cases simply conditions that made them inconvenient to their families or to society at large. The institution became notorious for abuse, neglect, and severe overcrowding. In the early 1970s, a young television reporter named Geraldo Rivera conducted an unannounced visit to Letchworth Village and filmed conditions inside. What he broadcast caused genuine public outrage and became one of the catalysts for the deinstitutionalization movement that reshaped American mental health policy in the decades that followed. The facility closed in 1996. The grounds are now partially accessible as a county park, with many of the original brick buildings standing empty. The burial grounds for former residents, where many patients were interred without individual markers, remain on the property. Place 4, Harlem's PS 186, Manhattan. PS 186 stands on West 145th Street in Harlem, and from the outside it makes immediate sense. A grand Italian Renaissance public school building that looks like it should still be full of children. It is not. The school has been vacant since the mid-1970s, meaning it has sat empty for longer than many of the people walking past it have been alive. Built around 1903, the building was considered architecturally significant from the start. Its 4-story brick facade and elaborate stone detailing were part of a civic effort to build public schools in New York that communicated investment, permanence, and the idea that public education deserved serious architecture. The building was classified as deteriorating when it closed and has continued deteriorating in the decades since, something of a recurring pattern with New York City public buildings. The city has periodically announced plans, conversion to affordable housing, community use, and those plans have produced nothing. The building received New York City Landmark designation in 1994. It remains one of the most prominent examples of a historic school building sitting vacant in a neighborhood that has seen substantial reinvestment over the past 2 decades. Place 3, Loew's 46th Street Theater, Brooklyn. When the theater that would become Loew's 46th Street opened in Brooklyn on October 9, 1927, the Brooklyn Daily Eagle reported it as one of the most disorderly opening nights ever witnessed in the borough. People reportedly climbed fire escapes just to get a look inside. The chaos made sense for what the building was, a proper movie palace, an opulent neighborhood anchor designed to make ordinary people feel for 2 hours like they'd been transported somewhere extraordinary. The theater operated under various names and ownerships across the decades. By the time it finally closed, the neighborhood around it had changed significantly. The economics of large single-screen movie theaters had collapsed entirely, and the building, once a source of genuine civic pride, had become a property nobody knew what to do with. It has been vacant for decades. The interior, which reportedly retains much of its original decorative plasterwork, chandeliers, and architectural detailing, has been documented by urban explorers. Their photographs show a space where time appears to have stopped somewhere in the late 1970s, and nothing has moved since. Empty balconies, ornate ceiling work intact, dust accumulating on surfaces that were once considered worth maintaining. The building sits in a part of Brooklyn where real estate development has transformed entire blocks. Somehow the theater persists. Make of that what you will. Place 2, the abandoned Caretaker's apartments, New York Public Library branches. This entry is less a single location and more a quietly remarkable fact that most New Yorkers have never encountered. For much of the 20th century, the New York Public Library maintained live-in caretakers at many of its branch buildings. Staff members who lived in apartments built directly into the library structures and were responsible for overnight security and maintenance. These were functional homes inside neighborhood public libraries. People raised families in them. As the caretaker model was phased out, the apartments were sealed off and left vacant. According to the New York Public Library, approximately 13 of these apartments remain in the system today, intact, in some cases still retaining period fixtures and detailing, simply no longer used or accessible. They exist above the reading rooms of branches that New Yorkers visit regularly. They are not on any tour. They do not appear in any public inventory. They are simply there. Sealed rooms in buildings hundreds of people walk into every day, with no sign to anyone below that those rooms exist at all. Of all the places on this list, this may be the most ordinary kind of abandonment, and somehow that makes it the strangest. Place 1. The South Street Seaport Historic District, Lower Manhattan. The South Street Seaport Historic District covers several blocks along the East River waterfront in Lower Manhattan, an area that in the 19th century was the beating heart of New York's maritime commerce. Goods from around the world moved through these piers and warehouses. By the mid-20th century, that commerce had shifted to the deeper container ports in New Jersey, and the neighborhood fell into serious decline. Over the following decades, the area went through wave after wave of development attempts, renovation projects, retail concepts, festival marketplaces, cultural programs. Some worked for a while, many didn't. What remains in and around the surviving 19th century warehouse blocks is a stretch of buildings that has been restored, abandoned, rented out, shuttered, partly renovated, and left to deteriorate in cycles that have been repeating for over 50 years. The historic Fulton and Water Street blocks contain some of the finest surviving examples of 19th century commercial architecture in the city. They also contain empty storefronts that have cycled through multiple tenants and multiple periods of vacancy. Superstorm Sandy caused major damage to the area in 2012, and the recovery has been uneven at best. Walking through certain blocks of the Seaport late on a winter evening still feels like walking through a place that hasn't fully committed to existing, where the history is right there in the brick and the ironwork, but the present tense is unclear and has been for a very long time. New York is a city that prides itself on constant reinvention. But reinvention has a way of leaving things behind. Subway stations sealed beneath commuter feet, islands overgrown in the middle of the river, hospitals standing empty while the neighborhoods around them change beyond all recognition. These places don't disappear. They wait. If you made it through all 17, you already know more about the hidden geography of this city than most people who've lived here their entire lives. If you found this useful, hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who want this kind of content. And if you want more deep dives into forgotten history, hidden places, and the things that cities keep to themselves, subscribe. New videos go up regularly, and there is no shortage of places left to find.